Hello, dear children. Welcome to the class. In today's class, we are going to start a new chapter, that is ratio analysis. Before starting the chapter, let me acknowledge that this video is purely for educational purpose. The content has been taken from the NCERT book, from the book T.S. Garewal's Analysis of Financial Statements. So many thanks to the author. Ratio analysis is a technique of financial statement analysis, and it is most widely used tool to interpret the quantitative relationship between two variables of the financial statements. Fine. So basically, it's a very important tool to analyze the financial statements. So let us learn about the meaning of ratio analysis. A ratio is an arithmetical expression of relationship between two related or interdependent items. Basically, it's an arithmetical relationship. When we calculate ratio, we are actually establishing a relationship between two related or interdependent items. Meaning of accounting ratio. Ratio, when calculated on the basis of accounting information, are accounting ratios. जैसे अब हम calculate करेंगे accounting ratios and we are going to establish the relationship between different items of the financial statements of your statement of profit and loss, and we are going to use them to analyze our performance, to analyze the efficiency of the business, to analyze the solvency of the business. Fine. So accounting ratio is thus an arithmetical relationship between two accounting variables. It is an arithmetical relationship between two accounting variables. For example, see, we may establish a relationship between that. What is the relationship between current assets and current liabilities? We may try to establish a relationship between that. Out of the total sales, what is the percentage of gross profit? Fine. Out of the total sales, what is the percentage of net profit? So in this way, we are going to establish the relationship between two accounting variables when we are calculating accounting ratios. Now, this is one of the famous definition of accounting ratio, which is given by J. Betty. It says, the term accounting ratio is used to describe significant relationships which exist between figures shown in a balance sheet, in a profit and loss account, or your statement of profit and loss in case of a company, in a budgetary control system, or in any part of the accounting organization. So basically, again, the meaning of this definition is the same, that your ratio is an arithmetical expression which shows the relationship between any two figures, any two items of your balance sheet, of the statement of profit and loss. And by utilizing these figures, we'll be able to derive certain relationships between two or more variables, which is going to help in concluding the performance of the business or the performance of a company. कि company कैसा perform कर रही है, fine, whether the company is efficiently doing the business or not. Meaning of ratio analysis. Ratio analysis is a study of relationship among various financial factors of a business. It's a technique of analyzing the financial statements by users. Basically, ratio analysis, it's a technique. It's a technique, and what do? By applying the technique, we analyze the financial statements. So financial statements are analyzed by the users in order to derive the conclusion whether we are having sufficient profit or not, whether we are working efficiently or not, whether we are solvent, whether the company is solvent or not. In other words, ratio analysis, it's a process. It's a process of determining and between the items of financial statements to provide a meaningful understanding of the performance and financial position of an enterprise. I hope that the meaning of ratio analysis is clear to everyone. Now, ratios can be expressed in four forms. Ratios can be expressed in four forms. First form is the pure form, and the example is, let's say, 2:1. This is the pure form of expressing the ratio. It could be expressed in percentage, like your, for example, 25%. Ratio can be expressed in times, let's say 3 times, or ratio can be expressed in fraction, which is equal to 3, for example, your 3 upon 4 or 0.5. Fine. So there we are going to learn about different types of ratios, and simultaneously we will learn that each of the ratios is expressed in which form. Either the ratio is expressed in pure form, or it is expressed in percentage, or it is expressed in times, or it is expressed in fraction. Now let's come to the various types of ratios. Now ratios are being classified into four categories. First type of ratio is your liquidity ratio. Liquidity ratio is helpful in determining the short term solvency of the business. Nutshell में आपकी जितनी भी liquidity ratios होती हैं, we will learn all of them. They are helpful in determining the short term solvency of the business. Second type of ratio is solvency ratio, and solvency ratio is helpful in determining long term solvency of the firm. Long term solvency of the business is determined by calculating solvency ratios. Fine. The third type of ratio is activity ratios. Activity ratios are also known as turnover ratios, and basically these ratios are helpful in determining the performance of the business. The performance of the business means we are able to determine whether we are running the business efficiently or not. The fourth type of ratio is profitability ratios, and profitability ratios, as the name indicate, they are going to be helpful in measuring the profitability index. Like we are going to compare different types of different profits, not types, different profits like gross profit, operating profit, net profit with our sales. So profitability ratios of the firm, they are being calculated, they are uh, to they are being calculated to measure the profitability. The profitability, various types of profits are being compared with the sales in, again, in order to, and we comment upon the efficiency of the business. Now we are going to take up each of these ratios in detail. Now the various type of liquidity ratios which we'll be learning are: first liquidity ratio is current ratio, second is quick ratio. The other name for quick ratio is acid test ratio or liquid ratio. So if you come across these terms, quick ratio, acid test ratio, or liquid ratio, they are one and the same thing. And these are liquidity ratios. So we are going to study two types of liquidity ratios. First is your current ratio, second is your quick ratio. And as we discussed before, that these liquidity ratios are helpful in evaluating the short-term solvency of the business. Second type of ratios are solvency ratios. They are being calculated to determine the long-term solvency position of the business, and the ratios are debt total assets to debt ratio. Second is interest coverage ratio. Third is debt to equity ratio, and fourth is proprietary ratio. We are going to learn each one of them in our series of videos. Then the third type of ratio is activity ratio, and activity ratio, it is also known as your turnover ratio. The other name for activity ratio is turnover ratio. So the first turnover ratio which we learn will be stock or inventory turnover ratio. Second is your debtor or trade receivable. It is trade receivable turnover ratio. Third is your creditors or trade payable turnover ratio. And your fourth turnover ratio is working capital turnover ratio. And each of these ratios, they are helpful in evaluating the performance of the business. Let's move to the last type of ratio. The last type of ratio are profitability ratios. We are going to learn about these different types of profitability ratios. First is gross profit ratio. Second, net profit ratio. Third, operating ratio. Fourth, operating profit ratio. Fifth, return on investment. Sixth, earning per share. Seventh, dividend per share. And last, eighth, profit earning ratio. We are going to learn about these ratios in detail in our series of videos. Now let's begin with liquidity ratios. Liquidity ratios are those ratios which are computed to evaluate the capacity of the entity to meet its short term liabilities. क्या मतलब हुआ इसका कि हम लिक्विडिटी रेशियोज को कैलकुलेट करके ये पता लगाते हैं कि बिजनेस फर्म की कैपेसिटी है अपनी शॉर्ट टर्म लाइबिलिटीज को टाइमली मीट करने की. क्योंकि अगर बेटा हमने अपनी शॉर्ट टर्म लाइबिलिटीज टाइमली मीट नहीं करी, देन वी विल बी डिक्लेयर्ड एज इंसॉल्वेंट, कि हमारे पास इतना भी नहीं है कि हम अपनी शॉर्ट टर्म लाइबिलिटीज यानी कि क्रेडिटर्स की पेमेंट, बिल्स पेबल की पेमेंट टाइमली कर सकें. और अगर ऐसा होगा तो बिजनेस की गुडविल विल सफर. सो दैट इज व्हाई लिक्विडिटी ratios are being termed as short-term solvency ratios, because they are being computed to evaluate the short-term solvency of the business. The first short-term solvency ratio is your current ratio. The first short-term solvency ratio is current ratio. Now, current ratio is a ratio. It is being calculated to establish the relationship between your current assets to your current liabilities, and it is computed to assess the short-term financial position of the enterprise. The formula for calculating current ratio is current assets upon current liabilities. The formula for calculating current ratio is current assets upon current liabilities. Now, what are current assets? Current assets are those assets which are likely to be converted into cash or cash equivalent within 12 months from the balance sheet or within the period of operating cycle, whichever is more. So if we list, if you prepare the list of your current assets, they are: first, current investments; second, inventories. Now, one thing need to mention over here, that here inventories exclude loose tools and stores and spares. अब बेटा हम लूज टूल और स्टोर एंड स्पेयर्स को इसलिए एक्सक्लूड कर देते हैं क्योंकि ये हमें बेनिफिट 1 ईयर, 1 अकाउंटिंग ईयर या जो हमारा ऑपरेटिंग साइकिल है उससे ज्यादा देते हैं. फाइन, लूज टूल्स दे आर नॉट exhausted within 1 accounting year or within 1 operating cycle. Fine, they give us benefit for more period. Therefore, loose tools and store and spares are excluded from the inventory when we are calculating current ratio. So current assets, they include current investments, inventories excluding loose tools and stores and spares. Then third is trade receivable. And trade receivable is nothing but the sum total of your bill receivable and sundry debtors. From these sundry debtors, we are going to exclude, we are going to subtract provision for doubtful debt. रीजन फॉर सब्ट्रैक्टिंग प्रोविजन फॉर डाउटफुल डेट फ्रॉम द डेटर इज, देखो बेटा ये वो अमाउंट है जो कि डाउटफुल है कि डेटर से मिलेगी या नहीं मिलेगी, तो हम अपने करंट एसेट्स में उन्हीं डेटर्स को इंक्लूड करते हैं जो कि कैश में 100%, 100% आर गोइंग टू बी गेट गोइंग टू कन्वर्ट इनटू कैश विद श्योरिटी. हम प्रोविजन फॉर डाउटफुल डेट, जो कि वो डेट जो कि डाउटफुल है कि वो कैश में हमें रिकवरेबल होंगे या नहीं होंगे फ्यूचर में, उनको हम एक्सक्लूड ही कर देते हैं करंट एसेट्स की काउंटिंग करते समय. फाइन. देन फोर्थ करंट एसेट इज कैश एंड कैश इक्विवेलेंट. एंड कैश इक्विवेलेंट मींस कैश के बराबर. अब कैश के बराबर क्या होता है? कैश एट बैंक, checks, drafts in hand, even marketable securities are also your cash and cash equivalent. Then short-term loans and advances, which the business firm has given to its subsidiaries, which the companies have given to their subsidiaries. And last is other current assets. Now, while calculating other current assets, the following current assets are included: prepaid expense, accrued income, and advance tax. Now, the sum total of all these are going to give us your current assets of the business. Current assets exclude loose tools, store, and spares. We have already discussed it in the previous slide. And also fictitious asset such as unamortized expenses, losses such as discount on issue of shares, share issue expenses, and loss on issue of debentures. Now, fictitious assets include unamortized expenses or losses such as unamortized discount ऑन इशू ऑफ शेयर्स और डिवेंचर्स. अब बेटे शेयर्स तो रहा नहीं, सिर्फ डिवेंचर्स पे. शेयर इशू एक्सपेंसेस लाइक योर अंडर राइटिंग कमीशन, लॉस ऑन इशू ऑफ डिवेंचर्स. बेटा ये सारे ऐसे एक्सपेंसेस हैं जो कि इनकर हो गए हैं और हमने इनको धीरे धीरे करके राइट ऑफ करना है. फाइन. तो तभी हम इनको कहते हैं दे आर क्लब्ड अंडर फिक्टिशियस एसेट बिकॉज दे आर नॉट टेंजिबल, they are not intangible, they are neither tangible nor intangible. लेकिन हमें इन्हें धीरे धीरे करके राइट ऑफ करना है. ठीक है. तो जो राइट ऑफ नहीं हुआ जो अनअमोर्टाइज का मतलब होता है बेटा वो पार्ट उन एक्सपेंसेस का जो कि राइट ऑफ नहीं हुआ. जो राइट ऑफ नहीं हुआ फ्यूचर में राइट ऑफ करना है तो उनको हम फिक्टिशियस एसेट्स की तरह शो करते हैं. लाइक यू लर्न the treatment of advertisement suspense account in class 11th. So these expenses are shown under the head other non-current asset. द अमाउंट टू बी रिटन ऑफ आफ्टर 12 months फ्रॉम द डेट ऑफ द बैलेंस शीट, और जो हमने करंट ईयर में राइट ऑफ करना है उनको हम अदर करंट एसेट्स में शो करते हैं. द अमाउंट टू बी रिटन ऑफ विद इन 12 months फ्रॉम द डेट ऑफ द बैलेंस शीट इन द बैलेंस शीट. फाइन. सो fictitious assets are not to be included in the current asset for calculating current ratio. Again, I am repeating myself. Fictitious asset जो कि अदर करंट एसेट में शो होते हैं वो इंक्लूड नहीं होते हैं जब किसके अंदर, करंट एसेट्स के अंदर, जब हम करंट रेशियो को कैलकुलेट करते हैं. It is used for calculating current assets, shareholders fund and capital employed. Fine. Now, current liabilities to be included for calculating current ratio are short-term borrowings, trade payable. Trade payable means your bill payable and sundry creditors. Other current liabilities, we have already prepared this list of other current liabilities to be included in current liability while calculating current ratio. It is current maturities of long-term debt, interest accrued but not due on borrowings. I hope you remember the difference between the two. Interest accrued and due on borrowings, outstanding expense, unclaimed dividend, calls in advance, etc. We had discussed each of these current liabilities when we were discussing the chapter financial statements of a company. And the last current liability to be included in your current liabilities for the purpose of calculation of current ratio are short-term provisions. So when these current assets are divided by current liabilities, we are going to get the current ratio. It should be borne in mind that provision for doubtful debt is deducted from sundry trade receivable and the amount so arrived at is taken as current assets. क्योंकि बेटा provision for doubtful debt वो debtors हैं जिनका doubtful है, तो we are not 100% sure that those debtors are going to be converted into cash or not. So that is why we are not including them in order to calculate our short-term solvency position. The objective and significance of calculation of this ratio is to assess the ability of the enterprise to meet its short-term liabilities in time. देखो बेटा क्या होता है कि current assets within 12 months और your operating cycle cash में convert हो जाते हैं. And this cash is used by the firm to pay back the current liability. This cash is used by the company to pay back its current liability. So if we are having sufficient current asset, they are going to be converted into cash in time, and that cash is going to be utilized to pay back your short-term liabilities. That means the company is having sound short-term solvency position. The ideal current ratio is 2:1. The ideal current ratio is 2:1. This means that our current assets should be twice your current liability. हमारे current assets current liability के 2 times होने चाहिए. Current assets current liability के 2 times होने चाहिए. Now one last term to be understood is working capital. Working capital means excess of current assets over current liability. And how it is calculated? We are going to subtract current liability from the current assets in order to calculate the working capital. I hope that the concepts which we have discussed so far is being clear to all of you. Hope all of you have enjoyed the learning today. We'll do the practical problems related to the current ratio in the next class along with the discussion of quick ratio. I hope that all the concepts which we have discussed today is also clear to everyone. Still, if you have any doubt, you can put your query on the WhatsApp number given at the end of the slide. That's all for today from my side. Thank you very much.